Unflattering light, seeing the enemy as targets to be engaged and destroyed systematically. Thus, the focus is on efficiency, leading to a methodical, almost scientific approach to war. Everything depended on the efficiency with which firepower was employed, encouraging centralized control rather than local initiative. Progress would be defined in quantitative terms, with battle damage assessments, body counts, and terrain captured. Relying on inflicting punishment, attrition meant being prepared to accept it in return. Victory would not depend so much on military competence as on sheer superiority of numbers and men and equipment. The implication was that lives were being sacrificed because of lack of imagination and skill. Here the maneuvers relying Here the maneuvers relying on intelligence scored. The maneuvers would circumvent a problem and attack it from a position advantage rather than meet it straight on. Circumvent problem attacking from position advantage rather than meet it straight on. The goal is the application of strength against selected enemy weakness. By definition, maneuver relies on speed and surprise, for without either we cannot concentrate strength against enemy weakness. The objective was not so much to destroy physically as it was to shatter the enemy's cohesion, organization, and command and psychological balance. To do this required superior skill and judgment. Who would not want to be associated with such a strategy? The key elements of this approach were all problematic, however. The idea of distinct levels of strategy was rooted in established hierarchies. The underlying principle was that at each level the objectives would be passed down from the higher. At the level of grand strategy, a conflict was anticipated, alliances forged, economies geared, people braced, resources allocated, and military roles defined. At the level of strategy, the political objectives were turned into military goals, priorities, and specific objectives were agreed upon, and allocations of men and equipment made accordingly. At the level of grand tactics or operation, adjustments were made as to the most appropriate form of warfare to achieve the goals of that particular campaign in the light of the prevailing conditions. At the level of tactics, military units attempted to push forward the goals of the campaign in the specific circumstances in which they found themselves. These levels reflected hierarchical command structures geared to regular warfare between great powers as much as sharp distinctions in contemporary practice. What was striking, given the contemporary fascination with systems theory and information flows, was that these were generally considered to challenge such structures. Under the influence of similar ideas, business practices moving to flatter hierarchies. Too many chains in the command structure were likely to lead to unresponsive organizations. Information up the chain about what was going on a ground level would be slow and subject to distortion. While initiative could be dampened in new orders, always while initiative could be dampened if new orders always had to come down the chain. This assumption continued to be reflected in discussions of tactical issues as short-term, immediate, and not necessarily of lasting importance. While strategic issues were the big ones, long-term and faithful, potentially existential in their applications, yet in limited war, single engagements could be decisive, and so local tactical factors would become matters of grand strategy and subject to the highest political control. During the 1990s, as local factors became more important, the Americans began to talk of a strategic corporal, able to make well-reasoned, independent decisions under extreme stress. Americans began to talk of a strategic corporal able to make well-reasoned and independent decisions under extreme stress, decisions that will likely be subject to the harsh scrutiny of both the media and the court of public opinion. The strategic corporal would be aware that his actions would potentially influence not only the immediate tactical situation, but the operational and strategic levels as well, and thus the outcome of the larger operation. There was also an operational dimension at work at the strategic and tactical levels. British historian Michael Howard identified three other dimensions of strategy in addition to the operational. These were the logistical, social, and technological. He warned of the danger of the preoccupation with operations in isolation from the logistical effort which made them possible, the social context in which they were being conducted, and the forms of technology which they exploited. The attraction of the focus on an operation level where all critical decisions of employment of forces took was that there would be taken away from the civilian military interface. That was at the notionally more important strategic level in practice. Limiting the focus to a distinct operational level had the effect of keeping actual combat under professional military purview and away from interfering civilian amateurs. In this, it reflected one of the military's explanations for failure in the Vietnam War: civilian micromanagement. The second set of problems occurred with the notion of the center of gravity. Even as the concept was adapted, there was little agreement about what commanders should be looking for and the methodology required to find it. It all might have been simpler if they had adopted Jomini's concept of the decisive point, against which the greatest possible force should be directed. This at least would have avoided the burdens of inappropriate metaphor. The army, for example, with access to a large force of its own, took the view that this was not about pitting strength against strength, as originally supposed, but more about an indirect approach, applying combat power against a series of decisive points that avoided enemy strengths. There it is. Living life 2 pages at a time.